Hi guys, let's talk about the life and work of Frida Kahlo. So I'm sure a lot of you recognize her. She's gotten very, very famous lately, and not just for her artwork, but also just for herself and how she looked. So let's get a quick biography here. So she was born in 1907 in Mexico. Her mother was Mexican, but her father was actually a German Jewish immigrant, hence the name Frida. In 1913, when she was really young, she contracted polio, and this left her permanent damage in her right leg. She suffered from that pain her whole life. To make things worse, in 1925, she actually got really seriously injured in a collision between a bus and a tram. So that led to injuries in her spine, and she had to go through a lot of different surgeries for that throughout her life. In 1929, she joined the Mexican Communist Party, and she also married Diego Rivera, who was a very famous Mexican muralist and painter. In 1939, she lost her third consecutive pregnancy. So her inability to get pregnant caused her a lot of pain throughout her whole life, and you'll see that come up in themes in her painting. In 1938, she had her first solo exhibition in New York City, though, not in Mexico. In 39, she divorced Diego, but they remarried the following year, so they had a very tumultuous relationship. In 1950, she underwent a total of 7 operations on her spine. In 53, 1 year before she died, she finally had her first solo exhibition in Mexico, and she was so sick that they actually carried her into the gallery in her bed. Okay, and then the next year she died at home. So let's look at Frida. So Frida had a very specific look, and she's one of those artists that became just as famous for her look as for her actual artwork. She wore very bright, bold colors, traditional Mexican dress, all the flowers in her hair, beautiful updos, traditional hairstyles, and traditional jewelry. She was also kind of famous for, if you might notice it there, and it shows up very much in her paintings, the little bit of unibrow and mustache. The reason she did this is because she really didn't believe in changing herself. She was very natural, and she didn't think that she needed to change for any kind of beauty ideal. Okay, so her husband, Diego Rivera, the famous painter. Well, that's him, and she used to call him her toad prince. I think you can see why. He may look like a toad, but Diego Rivera was a brilliant artist, and I'm going to assume he had a great personality because he was quite the womanizer, both before, during, and after their marriage. Her final star, the reason she finally divorced him, was that she found out that he cheated even with her sister. So Frida's injuries and the effect of her polio as a child left her in a lot of pain for most of her life. So she spent long periods of time in bed, either just because she was in pain or because she was recovering from this surgery or that surgery. And that is when she did a ton of her painting. So you can see her there laying in bed and actually painting. Sometimes she'd have casts on, like a big body cast, and can see pictures of her looking into a mirror and painting the actual cast backwards. All right, so looking at her style, then we'll see some examples in a second. She mostly painted portraits of people and primarily self-portraits. And she used a lot of symbolism. So we're going to see a lot of stuff in her work that really expresses her pain and her emotions. So some examples of what we're going to see is the use of animals to represent companionship. So because she couldn't have kids, she had tons of pets, like all different pets, monkeys, birds, everything you can imagine, and they became her children. You're also going to see, again, her use of traditional Mexican dress and also Mexican flora, so plants, flowers that represent her national pride. Okay. So let's look at this painting. This is a really famous self-portrait done in 46. Now, what do we see? We see Frida, and she's painted as a deer, and that poor deer has been shot with lots and lots of arrows. So right off the bat, if you see this painting, do you think this is the self-portrait of somebody who is happy? Probably not, okay? If you think about the deer itself, what could it represent? When you think about deer, maybe you think innocence, wild freedom, that kind of stuff, but mostly innocence and kind of a gentleness. But here she's been ripped apart by arrows, so this either means that she's been hurt by other people, or maybe she's just in lots and lots of pain. So here's two different self-portraits. The one on the left with the column in the middle as her spine, you see that the column is broken. And if you look closely, sorry, it's a little bit pixelated, but she has all these nails shoved into her skin. So that she's definitely telling us that she's in lots of pain all over and that her spine is basically breaking up on her. It's falling apart. The one on the right is more of how we see the traditional Frida self-portraits. So we start to see just her centralized composition and a little bit of that plant life and some of the jewelry that we can see her wearing and the hair updo. Here's a really cute painting that she did. This was for her wedding with Diego the first time around. So very simplified. This one's really interesting. This is called The Two Fridas, painted in 1939. Now, it represents kind of her heritage. If you look, the Frida on the left in the white dress, the very traditional European dress of like maybe an earlier time. It's more Edwardian, so like early 1900s, but very European. The one on the right is very Mexican traditional dress, right? So she is kind of bringing those two together as one, because you'll see her hearts, both the hearts are connected with arteries. And one of the arteries goes all the way down and it's being cut off by the scissors and you see it bleeding. So I think here she's probably saying that she's trying to, she's kind of bringing together these two aspects of herself as one. Now this one's really interesting. So clearly we know that Diego Rivera caused her a lot of pain. In this quote right here, she says, "I suffered two grave accidents in my life, one a streetcar accident, and the other was marrying Diego Rivera." Ouch, right? Kind of deserved it. But in this painting here, what do we see? She's crying, right? Her hair is all bunched around her neck like she's suffocating. But what's on her mind? It's Diego, right? We have a little picture of Diego Rivera on her forehead, which I think represents the fact that she's constantly thinking about him, or at least she's thinking about him right now while she's in pain. And if you'll look, Diego Rivera actually has a third eye. And what that usually represents is wisdom. So she still does feel or thinks highly of him, even though he causes her so much pain. All right, so the self-portraits are really what we remember Frida for. Let's see, it says, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best." And this is true. So what do we see? A lot of flora and fauna, right? So plants and animals. Here she has her little pet monkey wrapped around her, and you see all those beautiful tropical palms behind her. Here's another one with all her birds. But you'll see they all have this sort of centralized composition. She's almost exactly in the middle, looking towards the viewer. A slight turn of her head. Here we have two of her pets, a monkey and a dog, and that little statue in the back, you can actually see pictures of her hanging out outside her house, and there's this little statue outside. It really just represents her Mexican heritage. It's an ancient style picture. Okay, so here we go. So we've got the little parrot, some insects. Now the butterfly probably represents transformation as it's going from caterpillar all the way up to butterfly. But again, we have these beautiful palms, the flora. More of that. See the beautiful bird of paradise flower behind her and all her monkeys. This might be the most famous one. So we see one of her cats, her monkey, beautiful hummingbirds, and the lovely palm leaves. But then we see also this thorny sort of like sticks around her neck, suffocating her, cutting her, and the little hummingbird stuck in there too. So we still know that she's in pain. She is suffering constantly. Here's another one. All right. So what was going on in art around the same time? Surrealism. And we will talk about surrealism a little bit more when we do the perspective unit. But it's basically about dream-like images, things that nobody had done before. So it's kind of like an anything goes sort of movement. The most famous artists would be Salvador Dali, and then lots of others like Rene Marguerite. A lot of women surrealists too, Leonora Fini, Mimi Parent, Dorothea Tanning. So you'll see just kind of weird, crazy stuff going on. And she was lumped into that category, but she never really felt like she was totally a surrealist. All right, so what you're going to do for your self-portrait is you're going to do it in Frida style. So you're going to be on a large piece of paper right in the middle, looking towards, the viewer or whatever, but centralized. And then you're going to pick an animal that represents you and a natural background. So it doesn't have to be like Frida had the leaves, just going on. It could be a scene like you see on the right-hand side with like a beautiful garden. But no, a cityscape is not a natural landscape, okay? Something we want in nature. So here we have a little bunny and a seagull. So you want to think of an animal that represents you, that you think has qualities that are, that mean something to you symbolically. And a natural background, somewhere where you feel more at home. Are you a beach person, a mountain person, deserts? I want this self-portrait to really speak about you. Okay, so we have the little hen and just a simple tree, but lots of texture on the left-hand side. And here we have a beautiful owl with a lovely sky view and an open field. All right, have fun.